Aphids, an illustrated life. Welcome to this illustrated story about aphids. Text, images, videos and narration by Bo Nightingale, in the company of Mishka. When my children were at school, I spent a number of years developing the Mayhill Conservation Garden as a complementary education resource for the teachers to use in conjunction with the current curriculum, but mostly for fun and curiosity. During these years I did a lot of research, and so by 2020 I had already gained a significant knowledge about both flora and fauna in English gardens. On January the 19th, 2020, I purchased an iPad 11 Pro. It was the most expensive single item of electronic equipment I've ever bought. The quality of the camera was amazing, and to a complete novice it also had options for slow-mo and time-lapse photography. I set up a little experiment and pressed time-lapse. This is what happens to your plants overnight. Then, on the 23rd of March 2020, we were all told to stay at home. For those fortunate to have a garden space, this became a sanctuary, and for those with an interest in flora and/or fauna, it was an opportunity to become a little obsessed. Now there was time, lots of time, and nowhere to go. Without the distraction of a busy life, there was time to stop and stare. This is the Nightingale family cat. Her name is Mishka. Mishka played a part in the beginning of this journey and has overseen its progress and discoveries made along the way. Of course, most of the time she spent appearing to be asleep. It was Mishka who hid my gardening gloves, so having given up on any hope of gardening, I spent time looking a little closer at the plants growing in what started to become a glorious warm summer, with clear blue skies, unsullied by contrails. In fairness, Mishka hadn't actually hidden my gardening gloves. I'd left them on our tiny summer house, and Mishka had decided to lie on top of them and fall asleep. She hadn't even completely covered them, but the fingertips blended in so well with her lovely coat that they were hidden in plain sight. So let's start this journey. Whilst looking for my gardening gloves, there was a distraction. A cluster of tiny yellow eggs on a leaf. A quick photo and lens check with Mr. Google confirmed the obvious. These were ladybird eggs. Now everyone loves a ladybird, the stuff of fairy tales. A brand of wholesome children's books and a trusted go-to, a happy ambassador of all things lovely. Mr. Google also informs that according to the BBC, ladybird eggs take 4 to 10 days to hatch. With the best will in the world and all the time available, most humans cannot stand and stay for 4 to 10 days. So second best option, a ladybird's go-to food source, aphids. The information in this video comes mainly from searches on Google. Don't Forget the Roundabouts is a blogging site by Professor Simon R. Leather, an entomologist. The following has been cross-referenced with the information available on his website. In the garden there were 3 very large pots with sweet peas, one of which was completely covered in greenfly. Quite why they chose this pot over the other 2 remains a mystery. Some of the greatest discoveries have been made by quiet, still, time-consuming observation. So there was nothing to do but look and look and look some more. When there is time to really look intensively at a pest-infested stand of sweet peas, it's possible to observe that it is a really interesting environment and exceedingly busy. So let's look at the greenfly first. You most probably know that aphids come in a multitude of colours. Most commonly in English gardens they're green or black. At this point it should be mentioned that a digital microscope was added to the toolkit. It was an inexpensive item shipped from abroad. However, the images are sufficient for the purposes of this presentation. A really good microscope would show you the construction of the composite eyes in detail. It is sufficient for this journey to notice that the aphid eyes are a distinct brown colour. So let's look at the body structure of an aphid, which is of course an insect. The head has two complex eyes, and above the eyes are two antennae. The mouth of the aphid is formed by a sheath which pierces plants and protects the sucking structure which is inserted into the plant. Next, the aphid's thorax. There are 3 pairs of legs attached to the thorax. The rear pair of legs are longer and are used by the aphids for various reasons, including to kick away predators. In the winged insects, this is where the upper and lower parts of the wings are attached. Lastly, the abdomen. The digital microscope showed very clearly that the abdomen has 2 appendages which protrude upwards. Professor Leather confirms that these 2 appendages are called cornicles and are upright and point backwards. His research indicates that they have several purposes, one of which is to release a pheromone to attract other aphids. They also excrete a waxy substance which is used as a deterrent for predators. If you look closely, you can see brown dots. These are the eyes of the unborn daughters seen through the transparent skin of the abdomen. A chorda is usually present below and between the cornicles on the last abdominal segment. It's a tail-like appendage. The abdomen contains the rectum, from which the liquid waste of the aphid, the honeydew, is jet-propelled away from the body via the chorda by a swift kick from one of the hind legs. And finally, there's the birth canal. Aphid reproduction. Aphids are found around the globe wherever there is a food source. In cooler climates, some adult and nymph aphids will overwinter either below ground or in the cracks and crevices of their primary host plants. Other aphids overwinter as eggs. Aphids are surprisingly hardy and are able to survive relatively cold winters in the UK. In the spring, the aphid eggs, which have overwintered on the host plant, hatch and start feeding. The majority of these eggs will hatch into females. Now for the fascinating part of aphids. These female aphids in a few days will be mature enough to start producing daughters. They do this parthenogenically. This means there's no need for the female to mate with a male. All the daughters are clones of their mother. The second interesting fact is that these nymphs are born alive, as opposed to being laid as an egg and having to hatch. This process is called viviparity. So, I guess you'd like to see some evidence. Mishka found the next part of our investigation very interesting, and under her supervision a stem of sweet pea was taken indoors for filming. This is the first section of the video, taken in semi-controlled conditions. It was okay, but not really exciting and not really controlled. It transpires that a greenfly on a mission can move quite quickly, and like a box of frogs they soon dissipated in all directions. Keeping them in one place was as challenging as herding cats. Mishka took exception to this analogy. We rested the iPad on a pile of art books and a copy of the Faber Book of Nonsense Verse, then secured a piece of muslin across the open end of a glass vase and pressed the time-lapse button to start the recording. Videoed in real time, these aphids are looking for the perfect place to insert their stylets and start sucking the sap of this sweet pea plant. The small circle has an egg in the centre, and not an aphid egg. To the far left, circled in pink, notice the neat sloughed skin of an instar. Aphids and some other insects grow so quickly that they have to slough their entire outer skin in order to increase in size. Aphids do this 4 times in their life, and we'll return to this later. Most frequently, aphids will attach to a leaf. They will pierce the leaf and suck up the sap. Because the plant sap is poor in nutrients, the aphids have to consume a lot to gain the nutrients that they require. As a consequence, they excrete a lot of sugar-rich fluid. This is called honeydew. Switch to time-lapse. Watch as this adult female gives birth to live young, her clone daughters. From a different angle, she continues to produce daughters until late in the evening. Though tiny greenfly can move quickly when filmed in time-lapse, in reality greenfly cannot move any appreciable distance as an individual. When the food supplies become scarce, adult greenfly produce special daughters, called alates. Magically, these daughters have wings, and when the moment is right, they fly to find a new host plant and start a new colony. Because they are light, they can travel long distances in the wind. Though there are dangers, and they must first make it past the silken webs threaded like dream catchers across their path. So let's do some number crunching. If a newly adult aphid produces her first daughter on January the 1st, how many aphids will she and the generation of her daughters produce in 1 year, in 365 days? This calculation is an abstract model for illustration purposes only. It is based on one aphid living for 25 days and producing 80 daughters. The aphid and her clones live in a perfect environment with good weather, a constant food source, and importantly, no predators. This is a complex question. The average adult female could produce around 80 daughters in perfect conditions. However, the daughters who are born on day 8 of the mother's life will already be producing their own daughters on day 16 of our matriarch's life. Even if we calculate the total number in the simplest of terms, one female adult could potentially, in a perfect year, produce... This number is so big I don't even know how to say it. Answers on a postcard, please. Aphids, the predators. Creating such an abundance of potential food, it is not surprising that greenfly attract a variety of predators. Wherever we find aphids, sooner or later we will observe their predators. It may take a few days, but just as if there were a giant sign saying "Eat at Joe's" hung above the host plant, the predators will arrive. Most people will associate ladybirds with greenfly, and yes, it's true, ladybirds are formidable predators. We'll return to ladybirds presently. However, there are other predators who make a significant impact on the aphid population each year. This little brown and inconspicuous creature at the bottom right of this picture is a lacewing larvae. Almost inevitably, if you look closely at the host plant, you will find these larvae seeking out tiny aphids and devouring them at an astonishing rate. This lacewing larvae has a young aphid in its jaws. An adult aphid, above and slightly right, possibly the mother, circles, but is unable to stop the lacewing larvae from consuming the infant. Hoverflies come in a variety of sizes and colours and are important pollinators, feeding from the nectar of a wide variety of flowers. They are entirely harmless to humans. Aphids do not share that fortune. Whilst to my knowledge adult hoverflies do not eat aphids, the same cannot be said of the hoverfly larvae. As we will see, the larvae of a hoverfly is a formidable threat to aphids of all sizes. If you look carefully within the stalks of your sweet peas or other greenery affording a comfortable home to aphids, you will undoubtedly see one of these, a hoverfly larvae in its final stage before becoming a winged insect. When there is time to stop and stare, it is possible to watch this last stage of larvae dining al fresco. In this time-lapse clip, you will see how it actively seeks out its prey. And once found, it systematically devours them. In this replay, watch how the aphids move to distance themselves from the larvae. Even so, some are not so quick, and it literally sucks the juices from the aphid and discards their unravelled, untidy skins neatly behind it. Parasitic wasps. In truth, I cannot bring myself to discuss the process by which parasitic wasps use aphids as a host for their developing young. It's slightly too tummy churning. If you have aphids in your garden plants and look carefully, you will see these tiny wasps, around 5 to 7 millimeters in length, flying about. They're looking for a suitable host. It's curious that the wasp herself has to be cautious because the adult aphid can deliver a swift and damaging kick with her hind legs, as we will see later. David Attenborough and others have covered the process and filmed the empty carcasses. You will easily find these wherever greenfly inhabit a plant. Let's not think about this. It's far too disgusting. Okay, if you really wish to know more. Even in an English garden, it's possible to watch parasitic wasps flying around plant stems looking for a suitable host. These wasps are cautious as they approach the plump creatures. Keeping a close eye on the host, she positions her abdomen to fold under her thorax, so her ovipositor is in a position to dart into the body of the host aphid. She lays a single egg. The egg will hatch inside the aphid and then eat it from the inside. The telltale hole at the rear end of the victim is where a new wasp has successfully hatched and flown off. It will become the next generation of wasp predators. If you can see aphids on a plant, you will also easily see the husks of the parasitized aphids clinging ghostly to the plant. Ants. You may wonder what the expression dairy farming has to do with aphids. Well, apparently this refers to the symbiotic relationship some aphids have with some ant colonies. This video shows ants moving among blackfly on a runner bean leaf. The ants protect the aphids from predators. In return, the ants milk the aphids by gently squeezing the aphids to encourage them to excrete a drop of sugar-rich honeydew. There is a link to a good video at the end of this presentation. The relationship between aphids and ants is curious indeed. It has been observed that ants will clip the wings of potential escapee alate aphids to keep them grounded and to protect their food source. Now, as mentioned at the beginning, everyone loves a ladybird, the stuff of fairy tales, a brand of wholesome children's books, and a trusted go-to happy ambassador of all things lovely. However, the reality is slightly different for aphids. You will recall the 14 ladybird eggs at the beginning of this video. If you look carefully on the sweet pea leaf, you will see tiny dewdrops of honeydew. It is not by chance that our ladybird laid her eggs below and away from the aphids. All 14 eggs hatch into tiny first-stage ladybird larvae. In reality, they're really tiny and look like poppy seeds on legs. My guess is that their first meal is the sweet calorific honeydew drops on the leaf. If that's not so, I'd love to hear an alternative explanation. Answers on a postcard, please. Now, though this video is a little fuzzy, you can clearly see the seismic difference between the adult aphid on the left and the first stage instar ladybird larvae on the right. There are usually 4 instar stages for a ladybird larvae. My observations show that each instar stage, when the larvae is ready to slough its skin, it attaches its rear end by a thread to the host plant and then wriggles headfirst away from the restricted skin. All the readily available information suggests that all stages of ladybird larvae eat aphids. However, this has not been observed in these videos. In fact, the opposite appeared to be the case, with our tiny larvae passing bite-sized nymphs time and time again. As for any thought that the second stage ladybird larvae may now be big enough to tackle a juvenile aphid, watch how she navigates the sweet pea tendril and how the juvenile aphid avoids her with a warning kick. In this time-lapse sequence, notice how even at stage 2, the ladybird larvae actively hides from the adult aphid matriarchs. who have no hesitation in using their long rear legs as a defence mechanism. Notice how the ladybird instar shakes following the close encounter with the adult. It also seems as if the adult aphids are actively seeking to protect their clone daughters. However, everything changes by the time ladybird larvae reach this stage. Now they're easily recognisable with an elongated body and distinct orange markings. By this point, they're ninja aphid eating machines on a vicious and voracious eating mission. This is the stage where they are undoubtedly a gardener's best friend. At this point in filming, I had not appreciated that all stages of ladybird larvae have spider web type threads, which they use to attach their rear ends to plants as mentioned earlier. I wondered why this individual was stationary with no aphids nearby. The stationary ladybird larva on a yellow fluorescence was a puzzle. And then this happened. I have seen this many times now and no longer find it so tummy-churning. You can see the final stage instar fully emerge and start pumping up her new skin, which then turns black as it hardens. And now for the final feast before pupation. Attached to a runner bean pod, the larvae becomes a pupa before undergoing the ultimate metamorphosis into a beautiful ladybird. Who needs sci-fi when all this is happening in an English summer garden? Summer cools in September, and by the autumn the adult female aphids produce male offspring. Neither an iPad 11 Pro or a digital microscope in the hands of an amateur enthusiast are sufficient to illustrate the final stage of the UK aphids life cycle. According to Professor Leather, Wikipedia and various other sources, the adult females may then mate with the recently hatched and winged adult males to initiate sexual reproduction. The eggs will be laid on the primary host plant, a woody shrub, tree or in the ground. They will overwinter until the spring. Some of this summer's adult and nymph aphids may also survive the winter in a suitably protected environment. Though plump and juicy, aphids are remarkably tolerant of cold weather. As the year comes to a close, Mishka and I have marvelled at the fascinating journey we have taken together. We have photographed, videoed and recorded the life of aphids and the role they play in the rich diversity of insect life in an English country garden. Though in truth, Mishka spent much of the extended time we spent together asleep. Now it's time for Mishka to find a warmer place to curl up until next year, when again it is warm enough so that she can sleep in the summer house. Together we look forward to next year, to the spring flowers, frogs and the arrival of warmer weather and insects, and once again making time to stop and stare.